Well, our lilies might be fading out a little bit, but we are still in the season of Easter. And we will be for a few weeks, and for these next few weeks, we're going to follow this post-resurrection storyline. And as we follow where Jesus went and who he encountered in his post-resurrection risen body, we'll be looking at the ways that this resurrection leads to an expanding inclusivity in the earliest community of followers. Jesus continued to change the way that they understood the world and their calling within it. Now, in the story we're reading today, Jesus shares his scars in order to bring hope to those who see and touch his scars. And the painful experiences of life leave us with scars, and some of those scars become a part of who we are. You might think about what scars you have. I have a finger that's out of whack because when I was 2 years old, one of my siblings smashed my index finger in a door, and it only took a few stitches to heal, but the fingernail never grew back the same. So I've never been one for fingernail polish, something you sort of keep to yourself. Now, along with that lovely scar, my hands shake. I don't know if anybody has noticed that, but I have an essential tremor. It's a neurological condition, one that I had found a place of solace in the earlier years. Our oldest church member, Tommy Puckett, lived to be 99, and she had a strong tremor, and that was the one place we could get together and say, who's shaking more today? I also have a scar on the bottom of this foot where I stepped on a fish on the beach when I was 14, and now this one has arthritis. You know, we tend to hide away those imperfections that we don't want anyone to see. But I think this story in particular and the message of Jesus is asking us not to do that, to be real, to be ourselves. This resurrection story is about embracing life, this very messy, sometimes dangerous, scarred up life. And I think it's an affirmation of our vulnerability. It is an affirmation of the value of each person, regardless of our abilities or our disabilities or of our differences. There's so much in this one story. Now, as this story picks up today, 2 disciples are heading to the town of Emmaus, probably about a 2-hour walk. They're doing what people do when they don't know what to do. They're taking a long walk with friends to figure things out. This is where Jesus meets up with his confused and grieving friends. It's the 3rd day after he was killed and buried, and now they're just experiencing that something has changed as they walk away from the tragic scenes of Jerusalem. Jesus is walking with them unrecognized, seemingly a stranger, and he allows them to just share their story with all those details that are swirling around in their heads till they finally reach their home, and the men extend hospitality and invite this patient stranger to stay for dinner. Then they hear the words that are now familiar to us. When he was at the table with them, he took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And it is suddenly in this moment of sharing bread that they saw who he really was. And in that moment of recognition, he slips from their midst, and then they run to tell the others what they have just experienced. Because that's what you do when you have an exciting story, an unbelievable story to share. They're all together, and Jesus shows up again. They thought they were seeing a ghost, and he can see it in their eyes, and he tells them, look at my hands, my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as I have. And again, he asks them for food, and they share fish together. And one more time, they hear those reassuring words, peace be with you, so they can relax. And I love that this is such a physical story. It has scarred up hands and feet and long walks and good food shared. And there's a reason this is so important. Luke, while writing down all these memories, is wanting to say clearly that the resurrected Jesus is not a ghost, is not a disembodied spirit, is a physical being. There was a belief in their time that God could not really become human, be in the person of Jesus, because all of flesh was evil. God would not and could not become flesh and blood. The material, physical world was definitely inferior to the spiritual world. And it was important for Luke to affirm the humanity of Jesus, to refute those arguments. Because if the world of human flesh are evil and inferior, then the only goal of life would be to escape from this world to some other realm of the spirit. With this kind of a belief, the physical suffering, the pain of human life, hunger and disease and injustice, well, it could be played down or just ignored. Christians would have to focus on the spiritual concerns, the condition of the soul, separate from the body. Unfortunately, these beliefs still linger in our times and affect so much of our cultures. But no, Luke wants to make it perfectly clear that the physical, earthly, flesh and blood world is real and is valuable and is spiritual. Real and valuable enough for God to inhabit the person of Jesus of Nazareth, to be here in the flesh and the blood of the risen Christ. Luke's description puts this risen Christ right back into the world. See and touch my hands and my feet. If you think about it, the disciples probably hadn't given much thought to Jesus' hands before this. They were normal, everyday, looked like all the others, nothing unusual. But now something was different. Now these hands were scarred and wounded with holes. Jesus didn't say, "Look at my face, don't you recognize me?" No, what mattered was the scars in his hands and his feet. Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "Now, wounded and bruised, those same hands and feet were proof to the disciples that he had gone through the danger and not around it." What a beautiful phrase. Through the danger, not around it. Much of our time and our energy is spent trying to find ways around the things that are difficult in this life, rather than living through them. We don't want to experience pain. We don't want to come face to face with the suffering of other people because it brings us face to face with our own fragility. But this is what our faith asks us to do. Nancy Iceland writes in her book, The Disabled God, about the importance of this story for those in society that have been deemed disabled. Jesus, the resurrected Savior, calls for his companions to recognize the marks of impairment in their own connection with God, in their own lives. In presenting his impaired hands and feet to his startled friends, the resurrected Jesus revealed as the disabled God. As Eisen writes, the disabled God is not only the one that comes from heaven, but is also the revelation of true personhood. That fully personhood is fully and completely compatible with the experience of disability. She shares her own personal experience, saying, "This epiphany of the disabled God bore little resemblance to the God I had expected. But now I saw God in a sip-puff wheelchair, the chair used by most paraplegics, enabling them to maneuver by blowing and sucking on a straw-like device. This is not an omnipotent, self-sufficient God, but neither one to be pitied. I recognize the incarnate Christ now in the image of those who are deemed not feasible, unemployable, with a questionable quality of life. Now here was God for me. In his teachings and his actions, and now in his resurrection, Jesus repudiates the conception of disability as a consequence of sin. Very much a belief in their time, still very much a belief in our time. Someone must have done something to be in that position. Or maybe they just made mistakes that, mistakes I would never make. But our bodies are not artifacts of sin, original or otherwise. Our bodies participate in the image of God, not in spite of our impairments and contingencies, but through them. Truly a new revelation. Celeste Kendall-Shank also speaks of her experience, saying, I need these stories of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. I need a God who resurrects bodies. for I live with chronic illness. I need a Redeemer who has a body like mine with wounds both visible and hidden to the naked eye. I need a Messiah with whom even death is not the final limit for these bodies in which through God we live and we move and we have our being. So most of us would prefer to be known by our best features, and we always try to put our best features forward, our high cheekbones or the good nose or how's the hair looking today. We are known most deeply more by our wounds. So maybe what scars do you have? Do you have scars that tell a story? I suspect most of our wounds are even less visible than the ones on Jesus' hands and feet. And ours, sometimes we hope, are easier to hide from the outside world, for the outside world is not kind to those with imperfections. But when we are willing to share them, this is when we are truly known. When we tell the stories of what has happened to us and how we come through the worst, how we've been changed for the better. When we are open and vulnerable, that is when a space is opened for the grace of God to come in. This is when true community is formed and lives are transformed. When we hold out our wounded hands, our feet, our hearts for others to see and touch our scars, we create a safe place for them then to stop pretending that everything has always been just fine. Jesus' scarred body comforted his disciples, and it's a comfort to us as well. His wounded hands and feet are what pulled them out of their disbelief into this, what would become a radical, life-altering faith. If at the moment of his victorious resurrection, Jesus' witness was a witness of scars, then maybe we should notice and pay attention and do likewise. Maybe when the world looks at us to see if we are being real, if the faith that we profess is truly approachable and trustworthy, they may need to see our scars, our difficulties, our differences, even more than how religious we seem to be. And another thing I like about this story, it is about it's a walking together. Today, we can still sometimes feel the presence of Christ when we are walking together. And sometimes, because of our scars, it may be that walking this life together takes place sitting down. Those in a wheelchair who might have someone guiding them into a room to share the stories of the difficult times. Might be when we're sitting around the parlor here and we're sharing the stories of our pains and our joys. This is when we are walking the path of life together. We can share our vulnerabilities more than our perfection. So our wounds aren't pretty, and they don't tell the whole story of our lives. But the stories that they tell are holy. Jesus did not hide the bloody and broken hands and feet, neither should we. When we do this, we bring hope to the world. The commission that God gave his disciples and us is to be the body and the image of the risen Christ in the world today, with all its beauty, but with all its scars and imperfections. And we walk this path together. And now let's continue to worship together in song.